What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and for a company that hasn't been around for a very long time, OnePlus has certainly made a lot of strides over the course of just a few years. We're only a little over 6 months removed from the OnePlus 3T, but whether you're ready for it or not, OnePlus's newest flagship is here. Unlike the 3T, this is more than just a minor spec bump and is the true refresh that we've all been waiting for. So let's find out what's new, what's different, and if OnePlus still provides the most value for the money. This is the OnePlus 5. OnePlus has always been about delivering a powerful smartphone with excellent build quality and a great user experience, all at a price that undercuts the competition. And all that still holds true for the OnePlus 5, but that price has slowly trickled upwards over the years as the phone has gotten increasingly more popular and more powerful. The base 64GB model with 6GB of RAM starts at $479, and for an extra $60 that will double the storage and bump you up to 8GB of RAM, which is just insane to think about, especially when 4GB of RAM is still the standard on most flagships. I've been using the more expensive model with 8GB of RAM, and with Qualcomm's latest Snapdragon 835, this phone is just crazy fast. It performs every bit as well as you would want it to, and it's probably more power than anyone would ever need in a smartphone, which is certainly not a bad problem to have. Apps and games open extremely quickly, scrolling is very smooth, and moving through the interface is nice and fluid. Touch response also feels much improved over previous OnePlus phones and seems to track my fingers a lot better when I'm typing, scrolling, or swiping. With so much RAM on board, this phone can hold a ton of apps in memory without ever breaking a sweat, and it always felt snappy and responsive no matter how many apps I had open. For the screen, OnePlus is sticking to 1080p, and even though most high-end Android phones have moved up to Quad HD, it's not that big of a deal that OnePlus hasn't made the switch because the screen looks gorgeous and is probably the best 1080p panel you'll find on a smartphone. It's incredibly sharp, and unless someone told you or you read the spec sheet, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was 1080p. The screen size is 5.5 inches, which is a good sweet spot for a big screen that's still comfortable enough to use in one hand. It's also AMOLED, so colors are vibrant, full of contrast and deep dark blacks, and it's plenty bright that reading it outdoors in direct sunlight isn't an issue. While the OnePlus 5 still undercuts other big flagships like the S8, G6, and HTC U11 in terms of price, you don't have to look very far to figure out the reasons why. There's no wireless charging, no expandable storage, and the phone lacks any sort of water and dust resistance. Wireless charging and expandable storage are by no means make or break features, especially since the phone comes with plenty of internal storage, and wireless charging, while nice to have, isn't entirely necessary. But with so many phones nowadays coming with some sort of ingress protection, it will be a feature worth thinking about, especially if it's really important to you. OnePlus does make up for this in other ways. The fingerprint sensor on the front is extremely fast. It's definitely one of the fastest fingerprint sensors I've ever used, and it's covered in ceramic, so you don't have to worry about it getting scratched up. OnePlus's ever so useful alert slider makes switching between different notification profiles an effortless experience, and although this isn't new, it's a feature that's still very unique to OnePlus. It's also dual SIM and comes with the latest Bluetooth 5, which is currently only supported by a couple of other phones. The biggest change to the OnePlus 5 is the new dual camera system. Dual cameras are becoming increasingly more common on smartphones, but every smartphone that has dual cameras does things a little bit differently, and the OnePlus 5 is no exception. Most dual cameras either have the same resolution across both lenses, or the secondary sensor is lower resolution, but with the OnePlus 5, it's the exact opposite. The main sensor is 16 megapixels with f1.7 aperture and electronic image stabilization. The secondary sensor is a 20 megapixel telephoto lens with a smaller f2.6 aperture, but there's no electronic stabilization on this lens, and neither lens have OIS. Similar to Apple's implementation on the iPhone 7 Plus, the telephoto lens will let you optically zoom in by 2x without any loss in quality. OnePlus has also included a new portrait mode that simulates that nice blurry background or bokeh effect that you would normally get from a DSLR while keeping the subject in razor sharp focus. The manual mode has now been replaced with a new Pro mode that offers more control and a few nice enhancements. You can control all the usual stuff like ISO, white balance, shutter speed, focus, and exposure, but what I really like is the built-in histogram and a horizon leveler to help you gauge when your shot is perfectly straight. The camera is capable of recording 4K video, and EIS does a decent job of smoothing out any unwanted shakes and jitters. You can switch to the secondary sensor while recording to get closer on a subject, but because the second sensor lacks any form of stabilization, the footage is noticeably more shaky. Photos from the OnePlus 5 are well detailed, sharp without looking over sharpened, and color reproduction is more on the natural side and not overly saturated. Having the secondary telephoto lens is great for getting those closer up shots without losing any of the detail that you normally would from digital zoom. It's perfect for getting closer up on anything you want, but I found it to be especially great for macro shots. It does, however, produce slightly different colors from the main lens and is a little more inconsistent with exposure. The portrait mode pretty much works just as advertised. As long as you're following the camera's guidelines, you can get some very convincing bokeh that creates a nice separation between the subject and the background. Low light performance will depend on which camera you decide to use, but it wasn't all that surprising that the second sensor doesn't do all that well in low light. After all, it has a smaller pixel size, a smaller aperture, and no stabilization. Photos from the telephoto lens are much more washed out, noisy, full of lens flares and overblown highlights, and it has a lot more trouble with white balance. The main sensor will give you much better results, especially in terms of detail and color accuracy. I haven't talked about the OnePlus 5's design yet, and although there's a significant amount of refinements, it's not a complete overhaul. It's an all-metal body just like the 3 and 3T, but the 5 is the thinnest phone that OnePlus has ever made, coming in at 7.25 millimeters, and the aggressive taper or curves along the sides makes the phone feel even thinner than it already is. The antenna lines have also been redesigned to go around the perimeter instead of cutting across the back, making them a lot less noticeable. With the rounded corners and curved edges, the OnePlus 5 is nice and comfortable to hold, but because the sides are so thin, you don't have a lot to hold onto, and the phone is already pretty slippery as is with the all-metal body. The new design changes are nice, and I'm certainly a fan of most of them, but it's hard to deny that the OnePlus 5 heavily resembles an iPhone 7 Plus, especially with the addition of a dual camera system that's similarly shaped, has a lot of the same functionality, and sits in the same location. Despite the phone getting thinner and some of its similarities to the iPhone, thankfully, those similarities did not include the headphone jack, which can still be found on the bottom of the phone next to the USB Type-C port and the single speaker. The speaker is above average, but it's not amazing. It's a lot louder than I expected, but it can get slightly distorted at max volume, and it's pretty easy to accidentally muffle with your palm when using the phone in landscape. I suppose the only compromise to the phone getting thinner, if you can really call it a compromise, is the battery getting smaller, but it's only marginally smaller than last year's 3T, and it doesn't seem to have made much of an impact to the phone's battery life, because battery life on the OnePlus 5 is exceptionally good. The 3300 mAh battery lasts me comfortably through a full day, even with heavy use. That includes using the camera, playing games, watching YouTube, streaming music at the gym, and doing all the other usual stuff like reading emails and checking social media. On a much lighter day, I'll typically end the day with around 50%, and when that happens, I won't charge the phone until the next day, so it is totally possible to get a day and a half out of this phone. I honestly have no problems going to bed without charging it overnight, simply because this phone takes no time at all to charge. It only takes 30 minutes to get a 60% charge and roughly an hour and 20 minutes to go from empty to full. OnePlus's dash charging is just insanely quick and power efficient, making the charging process so much easier and convenient. One of the best parts about using a phone from OnePlus has always been the software. It's running Oxygen OS, which is basically stock Android, but with more customizations than what you would get from Google. Much of it we've already seen before on previous versions of Oxygen OS. You can customize the accent colors, switch between a light or dark theme, or enable on-screen navigation keys. There's a variety of off-screen gestures to open the camera, turn on the flash, or open up any application of your choice, and there's other useful gestures like double tap to wake. Just like every new version of Oxygen OS, OnePlus adds in more features to further enhance the experience. There's a reading mode now that turns the entire screen to grayscale to give you a similar experience to what you would get on an e-reader, and a lot of other nice little touches like a do not disturb mode made specifically for gaming, and the updated app drawer that swipes up from the bottom just like the Google Pixel. There's no denying that the OnePlus 5 is impressive, and it's really a no-brainer on whether you should buy it or not. Sure, it's gone up in price, but there's more packed into this phone than ever before, and that makes it completely worth the price hike, and it's still cheaper than most other flagships. It is missing a few key things that I mentioned earlier, like expandable storage and water resistance, and the design is a little uninspiring, but none of these are deal breakers by any means. Overall, it's a complete package, and OnePlus proves once again that they can deliver a phone that goes toe-to-toe with the best Android flagships without charging an Android flagship price. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this review of the OnePlus 5. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate it. And also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And hit that notification bell while you're at it so you don't miss out on future videos. And check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+. All that good stuff will also be linked down below. And check out the website as well, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.